this all works. I've had some requests for how to make wine in Maya. So you can see here I've modeled a wine glass. You can see from previous videos how this was done, but basically I revolved a curve. In fact, here's the curve right here. It's still there. I just hit it. So let me unhide it really quick. That is to say, if Maya will behave. Wow, okay. Weird lag there for a second, I don't know why. But yeah, I'll turn the visibility back on, and you can see that this is the curve that I used. Actually, this appears to be a different curve, even though it says curved glass. So, well, regardless of that, I did make these glasses from revolving a curve. And I have two glasses in the scene, one with a rose and one I'm going to be adding wine to. So, well, I've already added wine here, but I'll do it again. So first step, as you can kind of tell from that, is we need to make the geometry, and this is true of any fluid. Fluid in 3D still is geometry, although oftentimes the fluid is made from particles. And so we would use particle and particle dynamics. And then after making the particles move the way they should for whatever fluid we're talking about, after that, then we can triangulate or tessellate those particles into fluids. Anyway, so what I've done is I've double-clicked an edge loop inside of the wine glass because it has thickness, so I'm only concentrating on the inside right now. And I'll convert the selection to faces by hitting Control F11. Whoops, that was F12. Let's try that again. Control F11. There we go. And this is a little tricky because unfortunately I seem to have a hole in the bottom of my wine glass, which I'm a little surprised about, but that's okay. It's not going to kill me. Just make sure that you select all of the faces. So if I hit Control F9, that goes back to vertices, and you can see there's still some vertices right in the center that are not selected. You can see them. There are quite a few there that are not selected. So then what I like to do to grow my selection, there's a few different ways to do this. I think you can hit Shift plus comma. Yep, and that's a way that I can grow my selection. So that's one way to do it, but since I like to do things a variety of different ways, using Shift comma or Shift period is one way to grow your selection. Another way is to convert your selection. Say we go back to faces, Control F11, and then go back to vertices, Control F9, and then back to faces. Each time you do this and you go back and forth, you'll notice that the selection is actually growing. You can see how this has almost gone completely up my wine glass. I don't want that much wine, so I'll use Control and I'll deselect the faces that I don't want for this wine. Now, this just has the interior of the glass selected. That's all I've done right now. I need to make this a separate object, so I'll go up to Mesh, or Edit Mesh, and say Duplicate. Make sure to check Separate Duplicated Faces, but even with this checkbox, you'll oftentimes need to separate the object. If it's not clickable, you can't click it and turn it green, then it's not a separate object. So even with this checkbox on, be careful. You can offset your wine slightly, but I only do it by 0.0001. So just the tiniest offset, click apply. And again, if you see a green and white object, then that means that yes, you've successfully made a separate object, which is there, and then that's the wine glass. So back to what I was just saying, here's my wine glass. Make sure the name stuff, wine glass. And then this is the wine that I just created. Although you can kind of look at it and see that it's not finished. Like if I zoom in here, I'll give it a Lambert shader just to really prove my point. And so you can see some problems. I don't like to use Lambert for most things, but I do use Lambert for troubleshooting. I almost never render a Lambert material, but it's an easy way to see when things are working. For example, right now I can see that my normals are definitely inverted. So I'll go to Mesh Display and I'll say reverse. And now the normals are no longer inverted. But we have another problem, right? We have another problem because we have holes in the top and bottom of this wine. We don't want that. So we can close holes very quickly going to Mesh, Fill Hole. And so now I have a giant N-gon on top, which generally is a bad thing because look, I hit the 3 button when I hit the 3 button, I get really weird shading. And you can really see why the n-gon at the top. An n-gon is just something, it's a face with more than 4 sides. So this n-gon at the top of my wine piece itself is causing me lots of problems. There are a couple of different sort of theories, I guess, about this. Like, one idea is to quadrangulate this yourself. That, by the way, will not work until you triangulate. This is under mesh. Where are we? This is under, yeah, mesh triangulate first. And now you can see I have a bunch of triangles. And then mesh quadrangulate, which is a great idea sort of fundamentally to get quads. But note again, when I hit the 3 button, that's not any better. That's actually arguably even worse. So yeah, your n-gons are going to perpetually give you problems. And there's not always necessarily an easy way to solve it. There's an n-gon at the bottom here, but that might be not as visible being at the bottom of the glass, or just something the camera wouldn't see. So then, how do we fix this? Well, here's the thing. If it's animated, yes, you should always fix your n-gons. This is not animated, so hitting the 3 button obviously doesn't give me a good result. But if I add some edge loops and slide the edge loops towards the top, like so, one here and one maybe, well, wherever you want to preserve this detail. So hit the 3 button again. That actually looks pretty good. I might not need another one. I mean, you could add one down here, but I don't really see the point if you get the shape you want. And if you're not sure, obviously just turn the other wine glass back on, or just look at it, like hit the 3 button on both. And if that makes sense, which I think it does, like you might want to scale the wine in a touch. Let's center the pivot point, modify center pivot, and then just scale it in just by a touch, because we want it to still look like it's going to the edge of the glass. We don't really want a gap there, which I may have made accidentally. And again, it's fine if you want to switch to Lambert. See, once I switch to Lambert, I can see, oh yeah, there's definitely a gap there, and I don't want that. So then scale it back out. We don't want interpenetration, so just get really close, so they're just barely touching each other, like that. Okay. Now let's get back to making the wine material and the glass material. And you're probably saying, what about the giant n-gon? And I'm going to say, is that object deforming? And if the answer is no, this wine is not going to deform in any way, then I don't really care about the giant n-gon on top. And to some people that might be blasphemy. You should always have good topology whenever possible. I'm going to say, you know what? If it's not animated and it looks good in the render, I don't really care. So again, that's kind of arguable. Some people would always argue, no, always have the best topology possible. Always and forever, amen. And sure, that's a good idea as a general rule. Always have all quads, no matter what. But for the sake of speed, and again, ask yourself, does it render well? Then that might be all you need to worry about. So I make a new AI standard surface. I'm going to call it wine. You can see I've done this already once before. And then pick a preset that might work with wine best. And this is kind of where things get weird, because like, which of these presets would actually work for wine closest? Would it be milk? Because I mean, milk does allow light through it. We do have subsurface scattering. We would just have to just change the color, obviously. So that might be one option. Orange juice, same kind of thing. Or what I did previously is use deep water. So any of those I feel like would be close. I did use deep water previously. That worked pretty well, but I'm kind of wondering if I try orange juice and then just simply make the color red. Be aware, though, let's make it deep red like that. Be aware, though, that, look, I've changed this base color, and look, my preview hasn't changed. So something else in here is making this orange juice orange. And if you open up your different attributes, you're going to find out, oh yeah, there's some more orange colors under transmission. And what about subsurface? So we're going to have, yeah, and more under subsurface. So we have a lot of different places where we want to change the color to red. And even then, I mean, orange juice does not necessarily look exactly like wine anyway, but let's see what we can do here. When it comes to transmission, typically I want the scatter to be darker. Now, the lighter you make your scatter, by the way, the more light is going to scatter through your translucent object. So if you want more light, then obviously keep this as bright or white as possible, like even white. That means that the light is going to go through the object completely. But for something like wine, we're not going to have light travel through the wine that much. So probably a dark red or very dark red, almost black, would mean that you wouldn't get very much light through there in terms of transmission. And transmission is just a fancy way of saying translucency, by the way, as is subsurface, an advanced type of translucency. And in the case of radius for subsurface, this is what determines how much light goes again through the surface. So probably this should be pretty dark, just like the scatter should be up here. And don't forget about depth. So it's kind of funny, in the subsurface menu, radius, I repeat, radius and scale actually are going to be what determine how much light goes through the surface. In transmission, it's going to be like scatter has a big, plays a big part in how light is bent through the surface. Because translucency means that light is going to bend through the surface. We have something called index of refraction, which we have up here as well. And so you could look up the index of refraction for wine and see what you get. IOR is sometimes what it's called. So if we type in IOR for wine, we might get lucky, maybe. There is a long list of IOR for different materials. So it's sometimes difficult to find this exact number, but you can, if you look hard enough, find the exact IOR. IOR, again, is index of refraction. So it's just kind of a question of, well, what the heck? Where's the number? Somebody's got to have this number that represents the index of refraction for wine. And it's going to be a number, right? So what is this? 1.3. Oh, hey, look at that. Refractive index, 1.34. It's right there. So then what do we have currently? We have 1.4. So it's pretty close, but not quite. So let's go ahead and, whoops, go back to that. Change this IOR to 1.34. Make sure all your colors are red. Again, the subsurface color and the radius play a big part here. And wine is typically pretty dark red if we're talking about red wine. So now that I have, I think, a pretty good material, and I repeat, like normally I would use the deep water or deep sea preset to start with. So, you know, I'm experimenting a little bit to see how this looks. The material preview should give you a rough idea, but you also might feel like, well, I want more light to go into this. And if you want more light to go into it, you probably want to increase your scatter or increase your radius. So the more that you increase your radius, like this, the more light is going to go into the surface. And this is something that you just kind of have to render and adjust to taste. So, sorry, I don't have like exact numbers for things like radius or, whoops, or depth. But that's the kind of thing you're just going to have to figure out after rendering repeatedly. That's how it works. So anyway, go find that wine again. It was wine 2. And there it is. So we have glass as a preset as well. So I've already done that. Glass 1. And something I've discovered over time, because of course now this is basically completely transparent. The glass is like really hard to see in the viewport because it's invisible. Go figure, right? So then in order to make the glass catch a little bit of shadow, because at a transmission weight of 1, which is what we have now, that's 100% transmission, that's 100% transparency. That means that light passes completely through the glass and we don't really get a shadow. So by lowering this a little bit, like to 0.8, hopefully I'll get, or 0.9, let's do that. Hopefully I'll get a shadow out of the glass. I mean, if we lower it too much, then obviously we're going to get some kind of color, which we don't want. In this case, it's black, probably because of the scatter, it looks like, maybe. But yeah, let's keep this almost at 100%. So 0.9, it's like 90% basically. And now I have my glass with my wine inside of it, and now we can finally render. I would select both the glass and the wine, and then just only render the selected objects, where we have this option, render only selected objects, with this checkbox on. Just my only warning is if you're going to do that, of course, make sure that you remember that's on, because I always forget the checkbox is on, and then I render pure black, and I wonder what the heck is going on. So, yeah, having said that, let's try it out, see what we get, and hope that my wine looks good. I feel like if this doesn't work, then probably going with my original recipe might work a little bit better, because orange juice is, let's be honest, not that close to wine, but given the options I have in my presets, it might be a little closer than deep sea water. So remember to change your index of refraction. Remember to change your colors, specifically in transmission and subsurface scattering. And if you do all that, you should get some pretty nice looking wine. Just be careful to make your scatter color darker typically than your base color. Be careful with subsurface scattering. You generally speaking, you want the sub levels or the lower levels to be darker. So let's take a look. How does this look? If I zoom in, what do we get? I mean, that looks pretty good to me. It's a little bit hard to tell, but maybe if I hide the glass, just select this guy, we'll keep this image because that's always worth doing, and then I'll use a little render region with only the wine selected. I'm just kind of curious what I get with no glass covering it. Also, although the sky dome is really what makes the glass work because of the reflections, you can really see the reflections of the sky dome in the glass. When you're testing stuff out in order to cut down on render times, you might want to hide like a lot of the lights that you aren't using, or that's maybe making your render time shoot through the roof. So if you need to hide the sky dome, yeah, it's going to kill your reflections, and it's not a good idea overall. But if you're just sort of testing a material, or you're doing some modeling, it's like a little surface development on like one thing, then maybe you don't need every light on. And if your sky dome has a sampling of 4 or more, which it should, then it's going to take a while to render. So then it's not always 100% of the time recommended that you have your sky dome on. Usually, yes, it's a big deal, because usually you want your reflections to look good. All right, let's take a look again at this wine. I'm pretty happy with that as far as wine looking like wine. But if you weren't, let's pretend that you wanted maybe a little more light to go into the wine, which is fine. Then go back to your material and start to play with depth, scatter, and radius. So again, the more radius you have, so the higher your radius, the more light will go in to your subsurface scattering material. And the lower your depth, or actually I should say increasing the depth, is again going to let a lot more light in. So by giving it a lot more depth and by pulling back on the radius, we should see something a lot lighter. Again, save your image, and again, use render region. Note that I'm only rendering like half of my wine here, because even with render region and selected object only, I'm still getting what looks like maybe almost a whole minute just to render a very small thing. So this is again why I recommend hiding your sky dome or turning off your sky dome temporarily, just because it's going to take a while otherwise. It's still taking a while, for that matter. Okay, I don't know if anybody's actually watching this. Maybe, maybe not. I'm not really concerned about it because this is sort of an extra video, but curious nonetheless. Cool. So now we'll zoom in. Oop, things are going a little slow. I always notice that, hey, I actually like that a little better. You can definitely see that light's starting to come in. And if I go back and forth, yeah, there you can see it, right? So now if I go back and forth, you can see the light's really not scattering in here very much at all. In here, it's starting to a little bit. It's a little bit brighter up here. So you could continue, you know, tweaking that, again, by increasing the depth. I always notice that. Whoa, there is my own voice back at me. See the light's starting to come in. And if I go back and forth, nobody's here, but that's fine. I don't want to hear my own voice echoed back at me again. So yeah, as I keep saying, by increasing the depth in this case and increasing the radius, making the radius like brighter, that will allow the light to go much more into the wine. We don't want this to look like fruit punch, right? So we don't want this to be too much in terms of letting the light go into the wine too much. But this is just something you have to use a little render region and again, tweak your transmission and your subsurface settings. So whether or not I started with, I don't know, honey or orange juice or blood or I think the deep sea water was the other preset, it doesn't really matter because inevitably I'm going to be tweaking my transmission settings. I'm going to be tweaking my subsurface settings, changing colors. So, I mean, really, it doesn't matter. I repeat. What you start with, as long as you're willing to tweak it, as long as you're willing to tweak those settings. So I think I'm getting really close to what I want now. We're starting to get that fruit punch effect because now you can really see that light is really starting to go through. See, before and after, right? So here, this is almost closer to blood because it's so dark. And here, we really are seeing light definitely start to pass through the wine. If I'm fairly happy with this right now, which I feel like I am, I mean, I could push the depth back down and push the scatter back down and not have as much light go into the wine. But let's go ahead and check the render view, right? Because, I mean, we want to turn the wine glass back on, for example. Whoops. Didn't want that. Come on, Maya. Don't freeze. Don't. For some reason, Maya is really struggling right now. I don't know why. And I have noticed that when I try to have my Twitch open at the same time that I model, which I need to see the chat, it makes everything crawl to like just insanely slow. And it's very frustrating, and I don't know why Twitch would just suddenly make everything just come to a halt. I'm not sure. It just feels that way, and I don't know why. Like Maya will just suddenly go dog slow. It's not even rendering, and it's usually when I open up that Twitch window that happens. So yeah, again, very frustrating. Okay, so go back to the render cam. You could still render only the selected objects. That's going to save you some time. I always recommend that, just because we don't want to wait forever. On the other hand, having said that, make sure that you're rendering the right camera, which I was not. So render the render camera, not the perspective. Perspective is for modeling. The render camera is for rendering. And now finally I'm starting to see the wine pop in over here. The wine in the wine glass. And I'll take a brief look one more time. And if it's close enough, then, I'll move on. If the glass of wine is really, really, really far away from the camera, like anything in 3D, it's really far away from the camera, then you can get away with a little bit more inaccuracy. So if your wine isn't perfect, for example, or your wine glass isn't perfect, it might also depend on how close the camera is getting to it. That looks pretty good to me. I'm not going to lie. I'm fairly happy with that. So I guess I'll end this demo, and then I'll make a large rendering of everything. But I think I'm going to call this wine done. This wine and wine glass done. So yeah, hope that helps.